When a revolution is successful, the hard work isn't finished, because figuring out who gets power next can be a violent struggle in itself. In the 1790s, a colony of former slaves had this exact problem. They had freed themselves in a revolution, but two men had emerged as the potential leader for their people going forward. These men would lead armies of tens of thousands of former slaves against each other in a bloody civil war called the War of the South, or the War of the Knives, before one of them would become the uncontested ruler of their land. Before I go any further, if you want a little more background about the Haitian Revolution generally, I'll put a link below. So on the one side of this was a man named Toussaint Louverture. He was a former slave who rose to be the most powerful man in San Domingue. He was a brilliant general and a statesman that commanded so much respect that conventions were broken around race just for him. He favored centralized power, forced labor to get the economy back on track, and moral order. On the other side of this conflict was a free, wealthy, and powerful mixed-race man named André Rigaud. He wanted a more elite, pluralistic ruling class filled with people like him, and a return to some of the legacy ideas and institutions of their mother country, France. Now, these guys had worked together and interacted for a handful of years for the French, and seemed to be on the same page for a long time. They led different factions and controlled different parts of their colony, but they were both nominally working together for the French government, because at this time, the French still controlled their colony, San Domingue. But with every year since the start of their revolution in 1791, the French were steadily losing their grasp. And by 1798, Louverture and Rigaud met with the new French governor of the colony, a guy named Doodles. Now, when this French governor, Doodles, shows up, he was concerned about the growing power and independence of these two leaders. So he looked for an opportunity to play these men against each other, so that neither one of them would be powerful enough to challenge the French authority themselves. He started planting little seeds of discontent between them. So Doodles starts gassing up Rigaud, taking his side, boosting up his ego, and placing him at a level higher than Louverture. And Toussaint Louverture did not like this. Soon, Doodles would be gone, but the dissent he stirred between the two would never fully heal. Rigaud and Louverture started printing pamphlets, handing them out to the population of the island, painting the other side as a monster and claiming their own moral superiority. And then violence erupted, and this quaint tit-for-tat turned into massacres. This began in the south, where Rigaud moved first. He had to secure his territory, and to do that, he ordered an extermination of Louverture's supporters. Rigaud had less support on the island in general. He had an army of an inferior size, and he knew he would have to fight an asymmetric war to stand a chance. So when Louverture learns about these massacres, he tries to mobilize and invade into Rigaud's territory. But as he does this, Rigaud helps supply and stoke up the citizens in Toussaint's territory, citing the working conditions, insinuating that he wasn't a true supporter of the abolition of slavery. So Louverture had to scramble and put his own place back together. And in this process, assassins start coming after him. There were multiple attempts on Louverture's life, and in Philip Girard's biography, Toussaint Louverture, he describes one close call where Louverture had his carriage ambushed and riddled with bullet holes. He would have been killed right there had he not been riding on a horse behind the carriage. Even still, he was shot at, and he was so close to being hit that he had 2 bullet holes in his hat. So next, Louverture makes 2 moves that end up helping him win the war. First, he makes concessions to his population. They were worried about working conditions. Fine, I'll adjust how much time you get off, how much money you get to keep. Secondly, he writes to President John Adams, asking for help from the Americans. Now, the Americans, who were newly independent themselves, were not exactly super comfortable with a black, former slave-run nation. But they were nonetheless impressed with Louverture and interested in what he could give them. He seemed willing to work around the French, who the Americans were in a quasi-war with at the time, and the colony of San Domingue, if it could be put back together, could provide an enormous financial opportunity. So the Americans did what they do, which is provide him guns. And they even brought over some warships, which began blasting at Rigaud's territory in the south of San Domingue. So now Rigaud is on his toes, and Louverture presses his advantage by giving his best and most ruthless general, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the manpower to invade the south and take Rigaud out. On this campaign, Dessalines would burn and sack towns, destroy plantations, and massacre people who were associated with Rigaud. When this was all done, he wanted to make sure the South would not rebel again. And at the end of this, Rigaud was on the run. He would be picked up by the Americans and held as a prisoner of war in St. Kitts. He still believed that the future that Louverture was planning was not going to work. He predicted that Louverture's economic plans would fall through and that he was just replacing one hierarchy with another, controlled by him. Rigaud would have another chance to overthrow Louverture just a few years down the road, when he would work with the French to invade the island in 1802. Now, there's a big contention among historians about how bloody Louverture and Dessalines' campaign for the South was. How many people were massacred? How much did Louverture know about versus ask for? I'm not a historian, and I don't have a strong take on those questions, so I won't speculate too much here. But at the end of the day, it succeeded in putting Louverture in control of this colony and unified the inhabitants under his control. I'll end with this story, which is also from Philip Gerard's book, and it speaks a lot to the man that Louverture was. So the story goes that one Sunday before Mass, Louverture publicly rounded up the last group of Rigaud supporters and had them stripped entirely naked in the town square. It was expected that these men were going to be executed right here, but Louverture broke into an impromptu sermon on Christian forgiveness. He told the people gathered there, quote, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Return to your duty. I have already forgotten everything." End quote. He was ready to move on to bigger and better things, and within a year, he would be the uncontested ruler of the entire island of Hispaniola, at his zenith before his fall. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, it'd be really helpful if you can like and subscribe. I hope to see you next time. Bye.